Have you ever wondered why there's this huge, gaping chasm in wealth between countries? I mean, someone born in Oslo, Norway versus someone born in rural Cameroon, they're starting out in completely different economic universes. And it's not a small difference, it's massive. So today, we're going to dig into this massive mystery of economic growth and try to understand the powerful forces that really shape the fates of entire nations. So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on the sheer scale of this global inequality. Then we're going to play detective and look at two big clues. Is our destiny just written in our geography? Or is it all about the rules we humans create for ourselves? After that, we'll pop the hood and look at the real engine of growth, innovation. And finally, we'll get into the really tricky part. How on earth do you steer something as chaotic as creative destruction? All right, so let's just get right to the heart of it. Why are some countries rich and others poor? For literally centuries, this question has kept economists, historians, and philosophers up at night. Is it just random luck? Is it something about culture? Or are there deeper, more fundamental gears turning underneath it all? So, one of the first places people look for an answer is, well, the map itself. This is our first big clue in the investigation. What if the physical world around us, the climate, the location, is really the main thing driving our economic fate? The economist Jeffrey Sachs makes a really compelling case for this. He points to two massive geographical hurdles. First, as you see here, is the climate barrier. I mean, think about it. If you draw a line around the world's tropical zones, you'll find that's where most of the poorest nations are. The other big hurdle? The transport barrier. In a globalized world, being landlocked is a huge economic drag. Having easy access to the ocean for trade gives coastal nations a gigantic leg up. So Sachs's point is pretty deterministic, right? In his view, these big economic forces are kind of like gravity. They just pull investment and opportunity toward places with the right geography. These are what economists call exogenous shocks. It's a fancy way of saying they're things that happen to the economy, not because of it, like weather or terrain. And they're almost impossible to change. But hold on. What if geography isn't destiny? What if the real difference between rich and poor countries isn't the land they're on, but the rules they live by? And that brings us to the next big idea, the power of institutions. Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson argue that the rules of the game are what really matter, and they lay out two totally different types. On one hand, you've got inclusive institutions. These are the ones that protect your property, enforce the rule of law, and basically create a level playing field. But on the other hand, you have extractive institutions. That's where power is held by a small elite who can just take wealth from everyone else. In a system like that, the incentive isn't to innovate and make the pie bigger, it's to cozy up to the powerful to get a bigger slice for yourself. Economists have a name for that, rent-seeking. Okay, but here's where it gets really smart. This idea doesn't just throw geography out the window. It actually uses it to explain history. Just look at this chain of events. In places where European colonists faced super high death rates from diseases, they didn't really plan on setting up a new home. Their goal was to set up an extractive colony. Get in, get rich, get out. This set up extractive rules from day one. And here's the kicker. Those institutions stuck around, long after independence, locking these places onto a path that still leads to poor economic outcomes today. And the impact here is just staggering. The research suggests that a whopping 3/4 of the income gap between countries can be explained by how good or bad their institutions are. So this means a lot of countries aren't poor because of where they are on the map, but because of the historical baggage of the rules they inherited. Okay, so if good institutions are like the fertile soil for prosperity, what's actually planting the seeds of growth? What is the engine that's pushing everything forward? For that, we've got a peek inside the black box of technology and innovation. This brings us to a concept famously called creative destruction by the economist Joseph Schumpeter. And listen, this is not some gentle, gradual change. It's more like a constant economic storm where new technologies and new companies violently push out the old ones. The automobile didn't just compete with the horse and buggy industry, it annihilated it. The smartphone made a dozen other gadgets totally useless. This constant churn, this cycle of creation and destruction, is the very heartbeat of capitalist growth. But, not everyone sees innovation the same way. In Paul Romer's famous model, growth is about adding things. New ideas get added to our collective knowledge, like adding new recipes to a cookbook. But in the Schumpeterian model, from Phillipe Aghion and Peter Howitt, it's a lot more brutal. It's all about replacement. A new idea doesn't just add a recipe to the cookbook, it rips out an old page entirely. Obsolescence isn't just a side effect of growth, it's the engine of growth. This little timeline here makes it super clear how this works. You start at time 1, and the horse and buggy is king. It dominates the market. Then, boom, time 2. Some innovator, chasing those potential profits, comes up with a better technology, the automobile. And then, time 3. That's the destruction part. The car doesn't just compete with the horse and buggy, it makes it obsolete. And that cycle is what propels us forward.
Okay, so if you're a policymaker and you know this chaotic, messy process is what drives growth, what do? I mean, this isn't about making things smooth and predictable. It's about learning how to navigate the storm. The Aghion Howitt model actually gives us a great framework for thinking about the key levers and the tough trade-offs.
So the model gives us 2 main levers to pull. First, there's the interest rate. Just think of it like this. R&D is a huge bet on the future. A high interest rate makes that future payoff less valuable today, so it naturally discourages companies from making those big long-term research bets. The second lever is monopoly power, and this is the one that really messes with your intuition. Innovators are chasing a prize, right? That prize is the temporary monopoly they get from a patent. The bigger and more profitable that prize is, the harder they'll work to win it, and that creates this massive trade-off. If you promote cutthroat competition today, you might be killing the incentive to innovate for tomorrow. Now, this is a really big deal, and it's a total departure from that geography idea we started with. In the geography world, shocks are exogenous. They come from the outside, like a drought. But in this model, the shocks are endogenous. They are born inside the system itself. The random, unpredictable arrival of new inventions is the shock that drives growth. That means volatility isn't a flaw in the system, it's a feature. It's part of the engine. And this leads to a conclusion that is, frankly, pretty mind-blowing. See, models like Romer's, where innovation just adds to the pile, usually suggest we don't have enough of it and should subsidize research. But because Aghion and Howitt focus on replacement, the opposite can be true. When an innovator destroys an old industry, they don't have to pay for the damage done to all the workers and capital in that old industry. That's a negative externality. They get all the reward, but society bears some of the cost. They call this the business stealing effect. Which brings us to a pretty wild question for anyone in policy. Could a totally hands-off, laissez-faire market actually produce an inefficiently high rate of creative destruction? Because the private rewards for stealing an existing market can be so incredibly high, the model suggests it's possible for the pace of innovation to be faster than what's best for society as a whole. You get all this wasteful churn and instability because the incentive to be the next big disruptor can actually outweigh the collective benefit. So when you look at the long run, the stakes here for getting the policy right are massive. The economy can end up in one of 2 places. On one path, there's the no-growth trap. If the incentives just aren't there, maybe patent protections are weak, interest rates are sky high, then research just dries up and the economy stagnates. But the other path leads to a stationary equilibrium. That's where the policy environment is just right. It creates enough incentive to fuel a continuous, bumpy, but positive average rate of growth for the long haul. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? It's that real, sustainable, long-term growth is not a smooth, tidy process. It is messy. It is born from disruption. For policymakers, the goal isn't to stop the storm of creative destruction. The goal is to build an institutional ship that's strong enough to navigate it, to balance the need for innovation against the costs of that disruption, and to make sure that the chaotic, powerful engine of growth never ever runs out of fuel.